The blinking cursor on the screen has been my only companion for the last 3 weeks. That and the guilt. It's a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe the stale, recycled air of my San Francisco apartment. I should have been a better friend. I should have listened to her, really listened, when the first whispers of wrongness curled through the pines. But I was too tired, too wrapped up in my own world, too logical. Now, I don't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards in the apartment above, every siren wailing in the distance, sends a spike of ice through my veins. The police have a file open, a missing person case. Her mother calls me every other day, her voice a thin, frayed thread of hope that I can't bring myself to cut. They think she's out there somewhere, confused, suffering from a head wound. They're wrong. Maya never left those woods. I know this with a certainty that chills me more than any ghost story ever could. I know what I found in the dark. I know what I put in the passenger seat of her Jeep. And I know what I drove into the unsuspecting heart of a sleeping town. It's my fault. All of it. So I'm writing this down, not for absolution, because I deserve none, but as a warning. Because the thing I brought back is still out there. The trip had been Maya's brainchild for 2 years, a shimmering idea we'd bat around whenever the grind of post-college life felt particularly suffocating. For her, an artist who made her own hours painting vibrant, chaotic canvases in her Oakland studio, time was a fluid concept. For me, chained to a desk in the mercilessly logical world of IT, time was a currency I never had enough of. Next quarter, Maya, I swear, I'd say, pushing it off again and again. The guilt had been a low hum back then. Now it's a roar. When I finally caved, worn down by a brutal project cycle, Maya's excitement was explosive. My phone became a conduit for her joy. Texts pinged at all hours. Links to a diner in Southern Oregon that apparently served life-changing Marionberry pie. Photos of majestic waterfalls. Screenshots of Google Maps with trailheads circled in bright red. The centerpiece of her planning was the Spotify playlist. It was a 7-hour monument to our friendship, an eclectic, almost nonsensical mix of Fleetwood Mac, 90s pop anthems, and jarringly, the guttural shrieks of Norwegian black metal bands we'd discovered during a rebellious phase in college. It was us, in audio form. The morning we left, the San Francisco fog was a familiar gray blanket over the city. I'd barely slept, my mind still churning with project deadlines and code reviews. Maya, on the other hand, bounced on the balls of her feet beside her old cherry-red Jeep pickup, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a grin that could have powered a small city. "Ready to trade spreadsheets for pine trees, Chloe?" she'd chirped, her bright blue eyes sparkling. I'd tossed my bag in the back and noticed she only had 1 can of bear spray clipped to her pack. "Just one?" I asked. She waved it off. "We'll stick together. It's all we need. Save on weight." I didn't argue. As we merged onto the I-5 and the city skyline shrank in the rearview mirror, something in me finally began to unclench. The miles peeled away, and with them, the layers of stress. We screamed along to the lyrics of songs we hadn't heard in years, our voices cracking. We talked about everything and nothing. Her latest commission, my nightmare boss, the guys we dated, the people we'd lost touch with. The golden rolling hills of California slowly gave way to the deeper, more dramatic greens of Southern Oregon. The air itself seemed to change, losing its city grit and taking on the clean, sharp scent of distant forests. "See?" Maya said, gesturing out the window at the towering trees that now lined the highway. "This is what you've been missing. Real air, real-life color palettes." I just smiled, watching the dense canopy of leaves dapple the light across her face. She was right. I had been missing it. I'd been missing her. Our lives had diverged so much, and in the relentless pace of my career, I'd let this friendship, the most constant thing in my life, gather dust. The pang of guilt was sharp and sudden. "I'm sorry it took me so long, May," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She glanced over, her smile softening too. "Hey, we're here now. That's all that matters." She reached over and squeezed my hand. 7 hours of black metal and bad singing ahead of us, no turning back. We stopped for the life-changing pie. It was, in fact, very good. And drove the last leg of the journey as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. We checked into a small, rustic motel in the town of Pine Ridge, the air crisp and cold, the shadow of Mount Hood looming like a silent guardian. That night, sitting on the thin motel bedspreads, studying the trail map under the dim light of a table lamp, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. We were just Chloe and Maya again on an adventure. The world was simple. It was perfect. And it was the last time it would ever be that way. Waking up in Pine Ridge was like waking up in a different world. The air that filtered through the motel's screen window was so clean, it felt like a tonic, scented with pine and damp earth. Mount Hood dominated the view, its snow-capped peak a stark, majestic white against the deep blue of the morning sky. Even the silence was different, not the absence of noise, but a living quiet, filled with the distant call of a bird or the whisper of wind through the firs. Maya was, predictably, already up and vibrating with energy. "Last day, best day," she announced, tossing me a granola bar. I was looking at the map again. There's the main loop around Mirror Lake that everyone takes, but there's another one. A primitive trail. Less crowded, more rugged, it's longer, but we have all day. What do you say? One last big push? As long as it doesn't involve vertical rock climbing, I'm in, I laughed. The easy morning air making me feel braver than usual. My left ankle, a relic of a bad sprain in college that never quite healed right, gave a faint twinge of protest at the thought of a rugged trail, but I ignored it. I wasn't going to be the one to hold us back. Not today. An hour later, we were standing at the trailhead. The beauty was staggering, almost surreal. The Douglas firs were giants, their trunks thick as pillars, soaring hundreds of feet into the sky and creating a cathedral of green. The lake itself lived up to its name, a perfect placid sheet of glass reflecting the mountain and sky with impossible clarity. The water was a shade of blue so deep and pure it didn't look real. We set off, the crunch of our boots on the dirt path the only sound for a while. The main trail was wide and well-maintained, but soon we veered off onto the primitive path Maya had pointed out. It was little more than a thin ribbon of packed earth snaking its way along the steep shoreline. The air grew thinner as we climbed, and I found myself focusing intently on each footstep, placing my boots carefully to avoid a misplaced step that could send me sliding 20 feet down the loose scree to the water's edge. I was so focused, in fact, that I almost walked straight into Maya's back. She was frozen mid-stride, utterly still. I followed her gaze. Standing not 15 feet in front of us, blocking the narrow path, was a deer. A beautiful, slender doe with large, liquid brown eyes. It was a magical moment, the kind you hope for on a trip like this. "Wow," I breathed, my heavy panting and the jingle of my backpack's zippers seeming to profane the silence. The deer didn't bolt. It just stood there, its gaze fixed on Maya. As I came up beside her, it slowly turned its head, its eyes landing on me. There was a strange, almost analytical quality to its look before it finally gracefully leaped off the trail and vanished into the dense pines. Maya let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. She started walking again, a little faster than before. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice tight. "The deer? Yeah, it was incredible. Right out of a movie." "No," she said, glancing back at me, her brow furrowed. "I mean, something was wrong with it, Chloe. It was way too comfortable with me standing there, and I don't know if you could see from back there, but it was drooling. A lot. And it was making this weird little clicking sound in its throat." I tried to rationalize it, for her sake and my own. Poor thing was probably sick. Maybe it has rabies, or that chronic wasting disease you hear about. It's sad. Maya didn't look convinced. "Maybe," she murmured, but the lightness was gone from her posture. We continued in silence for a while. The mood subtly shifted. The breathtaking scenery was now tinged with a faint, nameless unease. The silence of the forest no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. We fell into a rhythm, the shared quiet of two people who know each other well enough not to need words. But this was a different kind of silence. It was heavy. The idyllic postcard we'd walked into an hour ago had begun to fray at the edges. The sun was still bright, the lake still a stunning sapphire, but a nervous energy now crackled between us. Every snap of a twig in the woods, every rustle of leaves, made me jump. Maya kept casting quick, furtive glances over her shoulder, her hand hovering near the small can of bear spray clipped to her belt. I found myself doing the same. We'd been hiking for another hour when the sound started. It was to our right, higher up the steep, wooded hill that rose from the trail's edge. It wasn't the skittering of a squirrel or the light tread of a fox. It was heavy. A deliberate, weighty crunch of undergrowth, the distinct snap of a fallen branch under a heavy foot. And it was moving with us. It was keeping our pace, a ghosting presence just out of sight in the dense screen of ferns and firs. "You hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely a squeak. I was now walking behind Maya, my hand clamped firmly around the can of bear spray I'd taken from her pack earlier, my thumb resting on the trigger. It felt pathetically small. Maya nodded, her eyes wide and fixed on the trees. "It's big," she mouthed. We picked up our pace, a silent, mutual agreement. The sound followed, relentless. It never got closer, never fell behind. It just shadowed us, a constant, unnerving reminder that we were not alone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, rhythmic crunch from the woods. I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, minding its own business. But a bear would either reveal itself or wander off. This felt different. It felt intentional, patient. After what felt like an eternity, the trail mercifully began to ascend, curving away from the lake and climbing to meet the higher ground where the sounds were coming from. The woods opened up a little, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The feeling of being stalked from above had been suffocating, but the climb was brutal. The combination of the 4,000-foot elevation and the steady incline was starting to get to me. My lungs burned, and my troublesome left ankle began to send sharp, complaining signals up my leg. I was more out of shape than I wanted to admit. "Hey!" I gasped, finally stopping and leaning against a large boulder. I need a minute." Maya stopped with me, her breathing also heavy. She sat for a moment, but her artist's eye was never at rest. "Oh, look," she said, pointing about 30 feet into the woods. "Lupine, I have to get a picture." She grabbed her phone and disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone on the trail. The moment she was out of sight, A profound chill washed over me, a cold completely unrelated to the mountain air. It was a primal, instinctive feeling. I was being watched. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood on end. The rustling grew louder, closer now. It wasn't just to my right anymore. It was directly in front of me, in the same patch of woods Maya had just entered. "Maya?" I called out, my voice trembling. I tightened my grip on the bear spray, the cold plastic slick in my sweaty palm. Then it stepped out of the woods, and my blood ran cold. It was the deer, the same one from the trail. Now seeing it up close, alone, I understood Maya's fear. All my rationalizations about CWD or rabies evaporated, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching terror. This was no simple, sick animal. It moved with a twitching, unnatural grace, its two thin legs bending at slightly wrong angles. Its fur was patchy and dull, its ribs starkly visible beneath the skin. And Maya was right. A thick, stringy saliva dripped from its slack jaw, which was opening and closing with a series of wet, clicking, gulping sounds that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the forest. It took a step towards me, its head cocked, its milky, clouded eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, unblinking intelligence. It wasn't looking at me like a curious animal. It was studying me, assessing me. I scrambled to my feet, waving my arms frantically. "Go away! Get out of here!" My voice was thin and reedy. It just tilted its head further, the wet clicking in its throat growing louder. It took another lurching step. This was not a victim of disease. This was a predator wearing a deer's skin like a poorly made costume. "Maya!" I screamed, pure, undiluted panic finally breaking through. She came crashing back through the undergrowth, her eyes wide with alarm. "Chloe, what is it?" I risked a glance back at the spot where the creature had stood. It was gone. It had vanished into the trees as if it were never there. I stood shaking, pointing a trembling finger into the empty woods. "The deer," I choked out. "The creepy deer, it was right there, Maya, I swear. I think it's been following us." A fragile, unspoken pact formed between us after that. We would not separate again. Not for a photo. Not for a moment's rest. The woods were no longer a beautiful backdrop for our adventure. They were a cage, and we knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in our stomachs, that something was in the cage with us. We moved faster, speaking in low, hushed tones, our eyes constantly scanning the dense tree line. The previous sense of being watched had intensified into a suffocating certainty of being hunted. But the trail was long, and fear is an exhausting companion. Despite our best intentions, our paces began to differ. Maya, fueled by a nervous, frantic energy, started to pull ahead. She had a longer stride, and her way of hiking was to push forward, capturing sights as she went. My method was different. I'd walk past a stunning overlook or a peculiar rock formation, and then regret would set in, forcing me to double back a few paces to get the picture I'd missed. It was this habit, this small, innocuous difference in our rhythms, that would ultimately doom us. I had just walked back about 20 feet to frame a shot of the lake through a V-shaped gap in the ancient pines. I was crouching down, angling my phone, trying to capture the impossible blue of the water against the dark green of the forest. The air was still. The only sound was my own breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. Then I heard her voice, carried on the breeze from somewhere up ahead, around the next bend in the trail. It was faint, the words indistinct. "Maya?" I thought she might be calling back to me, wondering where I was. "Hey, I'll be right there," I called out, my voice raised slightly, trying to project reassurance I didn't feel. I tucked my phone away and started walking faster to catch up. The response was not her voice. It was a scream. It wasn't a scream of surprise or a shriek of being startled. This was a sound ripped from the deepest parts of the soul, a note of pure, undiluted terror that cut through the peaceful air like a razor. It was sharp, high-pitched, and then it was cut short. Maya! The name tore from my throat, raw and desperate. I started to run. I wasn't thinking. All I knew was that my friend was in trouble, and I was 50 yards behind her. I ran, my backpack bouncing heavily, my lungs screaming for air. The sound started again, but it had changed. The terror was still there, but it was now interwoven with a new sound, a sound of unimaginable agony. It was a wet, gurgling shriek, punctuated by desperate sobbing gasps. It was the sound of something being torn apart. A horrifying realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was still holding the bear spray. She was up there, facing whatever had made that sound, and I had their only weapon. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I pushed myself harder, running as fast as I possibly could on the uneven, treacherous trail. For a few frantic seconds, I was making good time, my feet flying over rocks and roots. The world narrowed to the path in front of me and the horrifying sounds echoing from just around the bend. And then it happened. My left foot, the one with the weak ankle, landed not on solid ground, but on a soft, crumbling patch of dirt at the very edge of the trail. There was a sickening, grinding pop as my ankle rolled, folding under my weight with an intensity I had never felt before. My world tilted sideways. I saw a dizzying flash of green trees and blue sky. There was no time to scream, no time to even process what was happening. There was only the feeling of falling. I don't remember hitting the ground. I don't remember the impact or the pain. There was just the frantic, desperate run, the snap of my own bone and sinew, and then nothing. A sudden, silent, all-encompassing darkness. Consciousness returned not as a gentle awakening, but as a violent, confusing rush. The first thing I registered was the cold. A deep, biting cold had seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. The second was the darkness. It was absolute, a thick, smothering blackness. The sun must have set hours ago. My head throbbed with a dizzying, nauseating rhythm, and every muscle in my body ached as if I'd been beaten. I was on my back, staring up at a canopy of black silhouettes against a star-dusted sky. I had fallen. I tried to sit up, but the effort sent a bolt of white-hot pain through my left ankle and a wave of vertigo through my skull. I was at the bottom of a steep embankment, a good 15 feet below the trail. The last thing I remembered, the scream. Maya's scream. Maya. My voice was a dry, hoarse croak. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my concussion. I had to get back to the trail. I had to find her. My backpack, blessedly, was still buckled around me. Fumbling with numb fingers, I managed to unzip a pocket and retrieve my headlamp. The beam cut a shaky, pale circle in the oppressive dark. I found my phone. The screen was a spider web of cracks, but it turned on. No signal. Of course. The climb back up was a slow, agonizing nightmare. I used my hands to pull myself upward, my knees digging into the loose dirt and sharp rocks. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony from my ankle. My hands were raw and bleeding by the time I finally hauled myself over the edge and collapsed onto the trail, panting and sobbing. I sat there for a moment, trying to get my bearings. The forest was eerily silent now. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind. The silence was heavier, more profound than any sound. A new fear began to creep in. Something had hurt Maya, badly. And I was sitting here, injured, alone in the dark. Maya, I called again, louder this time. My voice was swallowed by the immense, indifferent darkness. No response. panic drove me to my feet. I started limping as quickly as I could in the direction I'd last heard her scream, the beam of my headlamp dancing unsteadily in front of me. I tried to push the terrible thoughts from my mind, tried to imagine a scenario where she was okay. Maybe she'd been injured and was just unconscious like me. Maybe she'd gone for help. But a cold, hard knot of dread in my gut knew better. Maya wouldn't have left me. If she were able, she would have been searching for me. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, my chin striking the muddy ground. Lights flashed behind my eyelids, and I was overcome with a wave of nausea. The fall had knocked my headlamp askew, its light now a dim, muddy glow. As I pushed myself up, a smell hit me, a thick, coppery, metallic reek. The mud I had fallen into was slick and sticky. It was dirt mixed with blood. It coated my hands, my face. I could taste its iron grit. Then I heard movement behind me. A slow, heavy footstep, the same deliberate, weighty tread from before. My fingers scrabbled in the dark, searching for my bear spray, for the small knife in my pack. Instead, they brushed against something hard and sticky, a piece of her backpack, and then something soft and wet that I knew with sickening certainty was a shred of her flannel shirt. I had found her, or what was left of her. The footsteps drew closer. I didn't try to get up. I couldn't outrun it. I squeezed my eyes shut, a single hot tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. This was it. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I could hear labored, heavy breathing, a wet, guttural sound that was horribly familiar. I braced myself for the blow, for the teeth, for the end. But nothing happened. After a long, terrifying moment, I forced my eyes open. I slowly, shakily, turned my head. Standing over me, illuminated in the muddy, dim glow of my headlamp, was Maya. She was alive, covered in blood, her clothes torn to shreds, but she was standing. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief tore from my chest. Tears streamed down my face, washing clean paths through the filth. "Oh my God," I whispered, scrambling to sit up, then pushing myself to my feet. "Maya, I thought I'd lost you." I pulled her into a fierce hug, burying my face in her shoulder. She was rigid in my arms. She didn't hug me back. Her arms hung limply at her sides. I pulled away, my relief slowly giving way to a creeping unease. Her face was a blank slate, her eyes vacant and staring. There was dried blood caked around her mouth and smeared across her hands. And then I saw it. Her flannel shirt, the one I'd just felt a scrap of on the ground. It was on inside out. The walk back to the Jeep was the longest 2 miles of my life. Every step on my swollen ankle was a fresh burst of agony, but it was nothing compared to the cold, creeping dread that was coiling in my stomach. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping me upright. The thing beside me looked like Maya, but it was a hollowed-out, silent effigy. It walked with a strange, unsteady gait, not like someone injured, but like a puppet learning to use its strings. "Maya, are you okay?" I asked, my voice a desperate whisper in the suffocating silence. "What happened back there?" No response. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed straight ahead, her expression utterly blank. The only sound from her was a soft, rhythmic, wet breathing through her mouth. Several times she stopped dead in her tracks, turning her head to stare back into the blackness of the woods. She'd stand there for a long moment, perfectly still, as if listening for a call only she could hear. Each time, I had to gently coax her forward, my pleas echoing in the dead air. "Come on, May. We have to get to the car. Please." The sight of her old red Jeep in the deserted parking lot should have been a relief, but it only amplified my terror. The familiar, safe space of her truck now felt like a trap. I pictured us getting inside, only for something to shatter the windows and drag us back into the dark. "Do you have your keys?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Do you think you can drive?" It was a stupid question. She was clearly in no state to do anything. She just cocked her head at me, the same unnatural, analytical tilt as the deer. I remembered I had her spare key on my key ring. I fumbled it out of my pocket and unlocked the doors. The electronic chirp sounded obscenely loud in the stillness. I opened the passenger door for her, and she stood there, motionless, until I physically guided her into the seat. She made no move to buckle her seatbelt, so I leaned across her, my hands trembling as I clicked the belt into place. The smell coming off her was thick and gamey, a mix of blood, sweat, and something else. Something wild and musky. I limped around to the driver's side and slid behind the wheel, my ankle screaming in protest as I positioned it over the gas pedal. As I drove away from the trailhead, leaving the oppressive darkness of the Mount Hood National Forest behind us, I kept glancing at her. In the intermittent flash of passing headlights, the horror of her appearance was thrown into stark relief. Her blue eyes, usually so vibrant and full of life, looked like black, empty pools. Her mouth was slightly agape, and I saw what Maya had described in the deer, a string of thick saliva connecting her upper and lower lips. She was drooling. "Hey, how are you doing?" I asked, my heart pounding. She turned her head slowly to face me, and then she began to make the sound. A wet, clicking, gulping noise that came from deep in her throat, synchronized with her heavy, open-mouthed breaths. Her breath, even from the driver's seat, reeked of iron and rot. I saw her teeth, tinged pink with blood. My mind, desperate for a logical explanation, grasped at straws. Punctured lung, internal bleeding. But I knew, on a level deeper than logic, that this was something else. This was the sound the thing in the woods had made. "Hold tight," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "We're about 20 minutes from the hospital." I floored it. The needle on the speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. The winding mountain roads blurred into a tunnel of light and shadow. The entire time, she never took her empty eyes off me, and the wet, rhythmic clicking from her throat never stopped. It was the soundtrack to the end of my world. The emergency room of Pine Ridge Community Hospital was an oasis of harsh, fluorescent light and sterile, antiseptic smells. The moment we stumbled through the automatic doors, me, limping, covered in mud and my own blood, her a silent, blood-drenched automaton, a flurry of activity erupted. Nurses and orderlies swarmed us, their faces a mixture of professional calm and barely concealed shock. The adrenaline that had fueled my drive vanished the second I was inside, and my ankle gave out completely. I collapsed, only to be caught by 2 orderlies. We were separated almost immediately. I was guided into a small examination room, my panicked protests about staying with Maya lost in the efficient chaos. A kind but firm nurse named David helped me onto a gurney. The relief of being out of the woods, of being in a place of science and reason, was so overwhelming that I almost broke down. "My friend," I gasped, as David began cleaning the grime from the cuts on my hands and face. "Maya, is she okay? Something attacked her. An animal, I think. She's not herself." David's expression was gentle. "We'll take good care of her, miss. Right now, let's worry about you. That's a nasty-looking ankle." He was right. X-rays confirmed a severe sprain and torn ligaments. I also had a moderate concussion and needed a few stitches in my knee. As they patched me up, I told David everything. I knew how it must have sounded. A rambling, incoherent story from a woman with a head injury. I told him about the deer, how it seemed sick but also intelligent. I told him about the sound it made, the same sound Maya was now making. And, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I told him about the shirt. Her shirt. It was on inside out, I said, looking him in the eyes, willing him to understand the significance I couldn't articulate. It wasn't like that this morning. Please, just make sure they check her thoroughly for everything. He nodded, a flicker of something, pity maybe or concern, in his eyes. I'll pass it along to her doctor. You just rest now. After he left, a local sheriff's deputy came in. He was patient, his voice soft, but his questions were pointed. He took my statement, writing in a small notepad. As I recounted the events, I saw the professional sympathy in his eyes curdle into skepticism when I got to the part about the deer's intelligence and Maya's strange behavior. He wrote down animal attack, head trauma, and disorientation. My story was being filed away as the product of shock and a concussion. I was the unreliable narrator of my own nightmare. An hour after the deputy left, David returned. The professional calm was gone from his face. He looked pale, his expression deeply distressed. "Chloe," he started, his voice low. "We have a problem." My heart seized. "What is it? Is Maya?" "She's gone." The words didn't make sense. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Gone where?" "We don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The doctor did a preliminary check. Strangely, she didn't appear to have any significant external injuries despite all the blood. He stepped out to order some scans for internal trauma, and just then a code blue call went off down the hall. It pulled every available hand for 2 minutes. Absolute chaos. When he got back, she was gone. The moment they left her alone, she just walked out. He hesitated, then added, "The security camera in that hallway's been on the fritz, scheduled for repair tomorrow. There were bloody footprints leading to the rear emergency exit. Barefoot. The door alarm never even went off. Thing must be busted." A cold dread, more profound than any I had felt in the forest, settled over me. She hadn't been in shock. She hadn't been a victim waiting for help. It, had just been waiting for an opportunity to escape. It had used me to get out of the woods, to get to a town full of people. It was free. It has been 3 weeks. I'm back in my apartment in San Francisco, but I'm not really here. I'm a ghost haunting my own life, trapped in the cold, dark woods of my memory. The official story is that Maya, likely suffering from amnesia due to a severe head injury sustained during an animal attack, wandered off from the hospital and is missing. Search parties combed the area around Pine Ridge. Her face is on flyers tacked to telephone poles and in the windows of grocery stores. Her mother's calls are becoming more infrequent, the hope in her voice wearing thinner with each passing day. The police questioned me again, asking about the blood in the passenger seat of the Jeep, which I'd scrubbed clean with shaking hands in a motel parking lot, an act that felt like erasing the last trace of my friend. They accepted my explanation that it was from her injuries. They don't understand. They can't. 2 days ago, I was scrolling through a local Oregon news site, a morbid ritual I can't seem to stop, and I saw it. A small article beneath a grainy logo for the Pine Ridge Gazette. The headline read, "Hikers discover human remains on Mirror Lake Trail." The report was brief. The body, uncovered by a recent downpour that washed it out of a nearly inaccessible thicket of blackberry bushes well below the trail, was listed as a Jane Doe. The state of the remains was described as partial, consistent with extensive animal predation. They were asking for the public's help with any information that might lead to an identification through dental records. I didn't need to see the dental records. The moment I read the words, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying final snap. Those were Maya's remains. My Maya. My funny, vibrant, life-loving friend died on that trail, screaming my name. She never got back up. She never made it to the car. The blood all over the creature I drove to the hospital. It wasn't its blood. It was Maya's. The thing I found in the dark, the thing I hugged, the thing that sat beside me in the Jeep making those wet, clicking sounds. It was something else. A predator that had taken her shape, her clothes, her face. A monster wearing my best friend's skin. It wore her until it could get to a place with more prey, and then it shed her, leaving her empty shell behind on a hospital bed. I look at the missing person flyer on my screen, at Maya's smiling face, and I feel the guilt anew, a fresh, sharp stab to the heart. I should have been a better friend. I should have listened. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry. If you live in Oregon, near the mountain, please be safe. Please listen to the silence in the woods, because I know that thing is still out there. I let it out of the forest, and now it's wearing a human face, and it's hungry. Story 2. What drives a man to hunt a shadow? I used to think I knew. I'd see them on those late-night cable shows, wild-eyed guys in camouflage talking about grainy photos and strange calls in the night. I figured it was for the adrenaline, a primal thrill in a world that's been paved over and sanitized. Or maybe it was for the money, the fleeting fame of being the one to finally prove that monsters are real. But I've learned there's a third reason, a darker one. It's the chilling realization that you're not the top of the food chain. So let me ask you, what do you do when you find out that the monster you're hunting is being hunted by something bigger? My grandfather Silas was one of those men, though he'd have spit on the ground if you'd called him a monster hunter. He was a creature of the Montana wilds, a man who had shed the skin of civilization like a snake. He'd been an engineer once, designing bridges and dams, things that imposed order on chaos. Then, one day he just walked away from it all. Bought 100 acres of unforgiving timberland bordering Glacier National Park, and built a life with his own 2 hands. The family called him a crazy son of a gun. But I knew better. The centerpiece of his cabin was the mounted head of a grizzly bear over the stone fireplace. People loved the story of how he took it down, but they always got it wrong. He didn't fell it with a single clean bolt. The first bolt had only enraged it. It was the second, a barbed harpoon head tethered to 100 feet of steel core rope anchored to an old-growth pine, that saved his life. The rope went taut as the bear charged, turning its momentum against it and giving Silas the precious seconds he needed to finish the fight with his knife. He hadn't conquered the beast with a lucky shot. He had outthought it with desperate, brutal ingenuity. That head wasn't a trophy. It was a testament. My best friend, Martin, saw Silas as a god. Martin was a city kid, born and raised in the concrete canyons of Chicago, but his soul yearned for the wilderness. He devoured survivalist manuals, his apartment a museum of expensive, unused gear. He wanted to be a real man, and in his eyes, Silas was the template. The same fire that had driven my grandfather into the woods now burned in Martin's eyes, a dangerous, romantic blaze. That's why we were heading north in my Jeep. Martin had finally convinced Silas to teach him the art of tanning hides. I had a different reason for going. It had been 4 days since I'd last heard from Grandpa. The region's notoriously fickle cell service had been knocked out by a big storm last week. but it had been back up for 2 days now. Still nothing. A knot of anxiety had been tightening in my gut. He was 72, tough as a pine knot, but the wilds didn't care about toughness. They were impartial. They just were. As we drove, the last vestiges of civilization fell away. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a dirt track barely wide enough for my Wrangler. The mountains loomed, jagged teeth of granite tearing at a brilliant blue sky. Martin was practically vibrating with excitement. I just gripped the steering wheel, the quiet hum of the engine doing little to silence the unease in my chest. Grandpa always answered. The silence felt wrong. It felt heavy. It felt like the deep, patient silence of a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. The Montana wilderness doesn't just surround you, it swallows you. The pines crowded in on us, their scent thick and resinous in the air. Sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. "This is it, man. This is the real America," Martin said, his voice full of reverence. I just grunted in response, my eyes fixed on the winding, rutted path ahead. "The real America is about to break my axle." We rounded a sharp bend, and I slammed on the brakes. The Jeep fishtailed to a halt. My heart sank. The road was gone, blocked by 3 massive Douglas firs lying in a deep ravine, making any attempt to clear or bypass them impossible. They looked like they'd been swatted aside by an angry god. "Whoa," Martin breathed. "That storm last week must have been a monster." I got out and walked toward the mess, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. "The storm was days ago, Martin. This is fresh." He joined me, his bravado faltering as he saw what I saw. The trunks weren't cut. They were shattered, the wood splintered into massive, jagged shards. The splintered wood at the heart of the brakes was blackened. I reached out and touched it. It wasn't ash from a fire. It was a brittle, crystalline residue that crumbled into acrid-smelling dust. It was as if some powerful acid or intense, focused heat had eaten the wood from the inside out. Faint, foul-smelling wisps of vapor still curled from the brakes. "Okay, that's weird," Martin admitted. "No way we can get the Jeep through this." I checked the GPS on my phone. We're only about 2 miles from Grandpa's cabin as the crow flies. The decision was easy, if unnerving. We'll hike it. We can come back for the Jeep with his truck later. Martin's enthusiasm returned in a flash. "Hell yeah! A real trek!" We grabbed our packs and started into the woods. The forest was unnaturally still. The usual chatter of squirrels and birds was completely absent. There was an absolute, dead silence, broken only by the crunch of our boots on pine needles. After about 10 minutes, the air began to stir, and a low, mournful wind whispered through the trees, as if the forest itself was finally daring to exhale. And on that breath, it came. A smell. It was the gut-wrenching stench of a slaughterhouse, layered with something else, something industrial and wrong. It was the reek of swamp gas, of scorched wiring, and of trout left to rot in the sun. It was a profane odor, an olfactory violation that spoke of things that shouldn't be. The chemical note was what got to me. It didn't belong here. It made the silence of the forest feel less like peace and more like terror. The woods weren't quiet. They were holding their breath. The stench became a physical presence, a greasy film that coated the back of my throat. It guided us deeper into the woods. Martin, for all his survivalist posturing, was looking pale. The romanticism of the wild was being scrubbed away by this foul, pervasive reality. We came upon it first by stumbling over it. A pale, bony object half buried in the damp soil. Martin nudged it with his boot. It rolled over, and we both recoiled. It was a head. It was vaguely deer-like, but the snout was too long, the bone of the skull a sickly, porcelain white. And the teeth. God, the teeth. They were long and thin, like a row of dirty needles jutting out from blackened gums. It was the head of a wendigo. Grandpa had told me the stories, the old Algonquin legends of a cannibalistic spirit. The legends disagreed on the details. Some spoke of a hairless gray creature, others of a hulking beast cloaked in shadow and fur. But they all agreed it was a thing of pure, malevolent power. Before us was proof that the furred version was real. A single, milky white eye stared sightlessly at the canopy. The blood pooled around its severed neck was a thick black substance that looked more like tar than blood. "What the hell is that?" Martin whispered, his voice trembling. "A wolf with mange?" "No," I said, my own voice a dry rasp. "No bear or cougar did this." I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that no predator native to these woods could have done this. A wendigo was supposed to be an apex predator. It was the thing you ran from. It wasn't supposed to be a victim. The smell was overwhelming here. We pushed past a thicket of ferns, and then we saw the rest of it. The body. It was laid out in a small clearing, a masterpiece of cosmic horror. It was at least 8 feet tall but emaciated, its gray, leathery skin stretched taut over a rack of protruding ribs. Its limbs were unnaturally long and spindly, ending in claws like black obsidian knives. But it hadn't been torn apart. Its torso and limbs were riddled with dozens of deep, perfectly round puncture wounds, some as wide as my fist. It looked less like it had been killed and more like it had been impaled. Repeatedly, from multiple angles at once, as if it had been caught in a threshing machine made of giant spikes. Its skeletal frame was broken and twisted at impossible angles. Whatever had killed this thing hadn't just fought it, it had annihilated it. Then I heard it. Not a twig snapping. It was the deep, resonant crack of a limb the thickness of my thigh breaking under immense weight. It came from the dense shadows of the pines just beyond the clearing. Instinct took over. My head whipped around, and for a fraction of a second I saw it. It wasn't a clear image, just a suggestion of movement. Something colossal. A vast, shifting shape the color of pine bark and wet earth, so huge it seemed to blot out the trees behind it. It was there, and then, in the time it took me to blink, it was gone. A primal, animal terror seized me, colder and sharper than anything I had ever felt. My lungs locked up. "What was that?" Martin hissed, his eyes wide. I couldn't tell him the truth. The panic would break him. "Cougar, maybe," I lied, my voice shaking. "A big one. We need to go. Now." My hands were trembling, but I managed to pull my phone from my pocket. I snapped a few pictures of the corpse, the flash weirdly illuminating the puncture wounds. Evidence. Proof. Then I grabbed Martin's arm and pulled him away, breaking into a clumsy run, not looking back. We were trespassing in a giant's hunting ground. We crashed through the undergrowth, the adrenaline afire in our veins. Behind us, the forest was no longer silent. We could hear it following. Heavy, rhythmic footfalls, impossibly weighty yet deliberate. Thump. Scrape. Thump. Scrape. It was keeping pace with us, moving on a parallel course through the dense trees. This wasn't a chase. It was a herding. It knew exactly where we were, and it was in no hurry. "It's still there," Martin gasped, stumbling over a root. "Caleb, what is that thing?" "Don't look back, just run," I yelled, pulling him to his feet. We burst out of the dense woods onto a narrow game trail. Ahead of us, maybe 100 yards down the trail, was a small herd of white-tailed deer grazing peacefully. For a moment, a sliver of hope cut through my terror. Deer, a sign of normalcy. It was a fatal miscalculation. One of the deer, a young buck, suddenly froze, looking at the empty space beside it. Its body went rigid. Then, impossibly, it began to rise. It lifted off the ground, 5, 10, 15 feet into the air, as if snagged by an invisible hook. There was a series of sickening wet crunches as its limbs were bent and broken. Blood erupted from its body in crimson fountains, and then the thing that held it shimmered into existence, cloaked in some perfect, impossible camouflage. It was colossal, easily the size of 2 semi-trucks stacked on top of each other. Its body was a hulking mass supported by 2 disproportionately long forelimbs ending in 5-foot-long curved claws. Its back legs were shorter, with knees that bent backward like a bird's. Its spine seemed to compress and decompress, allowing it to loom to its full height or crouch low. Perched atop a long, sinuous neck was a false head, a hollow, calcified mockery of a skull that looked like a demented hybrid of a horse and a crocodile. The deer wasn't being eaten by that mouth. The real horror was on the creature's underbelly. A section of its torso pulsed, and a series of long, chitinous, rib-like appendages unfolded. They weren't ribs, they were feeding tubes. They plunged into the deer's suspended body and began to drain it. We watched, paralyzed, as the deer's form rapidly deflated, its skin shrinking and shriveling until it was nothing more than a wrinkled, empty hide. Then, from the gaping maw of the false head, a thick, greasy column of black smoke began to pour out. The false head wasn't a head at all. It was a chimney, a biological lure. The beast paid us no mind. It let out a low, guttural chuff and lumbered after the rest of the fleeing herd, smashing through 20-foot saplings as if they were matchsticks before vanishing back into the trees. The world went silent again, save for the frantic hammering of my own heart. Martin was on his knees, vomiting. I stood frozen, my mind a blank slate of pure, undiluted shock. We had just seen the forest god fall, and now we had seen the devil that had cast it down. The spell of paralysis broke, replaced by a frantic, gibbering panic. Martin scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of white terror. "The Jeep! We have to get back to the Jeep!" he shrieked. "No!" I grabbed his shirt. "Martin, listen. That thing smashed trees the size of cars. You think a metal box on wheels is going to stop it? It'll peel it open like a tin can." "Then what do we do? We're going to die out here." "Grandpa," I said, the word a prayer. "His cabin is our only chance. If anyone knows what to do, it's him. We can't just leave him." The argument cut through his panic. He nodded, his whole body trembling. Okay, the cabin." The sun was a bloody smear on the horizon. Darkness was coming. We ran, stumbling through the twilight. Then, through the trees, we saw it. A light, and rising from behind a small hill, a steady column of smoke. "There," Martin cried, a sob of relief in his throat. "He's home. The chimney's going." Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. We ran toward it, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. We scrambled up the small rise, expecting to see the familiar log cabin. Instead, we saw nothing. The clearing was empty. There was no cabin. The column of smoke was still there, rising from the forest floor 20 yards in front of us. And the light wasn't a lantern. It was a shifting, oily yellow glow, like marsh gas catching fire, pulsing with a sick, organic warmth. It emanated from the creature's lolling, false head. It had been waiting for us. It had faked the smoke. It had faked the light. It had set a trap. The creature was crouched low, its massive form blending almost perfectly with the deepening shadows. Under the cold light of a rising moon, I saw its real eyes. Not 2, but 6. They were perfectly round, polished black spheres, like orbs of obsidian, each one moving independently. One tracked me. Another tracked Martin. A third scanned the trees behind us. They gleamed with a cold, calculating intelligence that was far more terrifying than any mindless brutality. A low growl like grinding rocks rumbled from its chest. The trap was sprung. There was no time to think. I grabbed Martin's arm. "That way!" I screamed, pointing in the direction I prayed was correct. "Run!" We bolted. Behind us, an earth-shattering roar ripped through the night. The ground shook as the beast heaved itself to its feet. The sound of splintering timber was deafening as it gave chase, no longer herding, but in raw, unrestrained pursuit. We sprinted across a small clearing, our only advantage as the beast seemed to prefer the cover of the tree line. And then I saw it. The real cabin. A dark silhouette against the star-dusted sky. "Grandpa!" I screamed, my voice raw. We hit the porch with the force of a car crash, hammering on the heavy wooden door. "Let us in!" The door was yanked open. Silas stood there, his face gaunt, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored our own. He held a heavy 10-gauge shotgun. He looked past us, into the darkness, and his pupils contracted to pinpricks. "Get inside now!" he rasped, pulling us in and slamming the heavy oak door shut. The inside of the cabin was a fortress of shadows. Silas threw the heavy deadbolt, then rammed an iron bar into brackets on the doorframe. He didn't ask what we'd seen. The terror on our faces was answer enough. "Downstairs," he commanded. "Into the cellar." He led us to a trapdoor and pulled it open, revealing steep stone steps. We scrambled down, and he followed, sealing the heavy door above us. He lit a kerosene lantern, and the small, stone-walled space flickered to life. Silas sagged against a wall, the shotgun held loosely. "You saw it," he stated. "We saw what it did to a wendigo," I stammered, showing him the pictures on my phone. He stared at the screen, his face grim. "So that's what it was hunting." He let out a long, weary breath. "I've seen it before. Once. A long time ago, when I was a young man backpacking through the rolled forest in Denmark and North Jutland. The locals had a name for it. Skorstender, the chimney beast." Everything clicked into place. The fake smoke, the lure. It was an ancient hunting tactic. "It's not from here, Caleb," Silas continued, his voice low and urgent. "A few days ago I found a place, a spot in the air, no bigger than a doorway, where everything was wrong. The light bent around it, like heat haze. It's a tear in the world." He looked at me, his eyes burning. It looked small, but the air around it was elastic. It expands to accommodate whatever passes through. That's how it got here. But once a large mass goes through, it snaps shut, scars over. It's a one-way trip for a thing that big unless it can tear it open again from the other side. This is our only chance. A desperate, insane plan was forming in his eyes. "I have to be the bait." "What?" Martin and I said in unison. "Creatures like that, they operate on a hierarchy of threats," Silas said, his voice hardening. "You two are just food. I'm competition. It killed the wendigo for the same reason, to eliminate a rival alpha. It will always go for the bigger threat first. You two stay here. Make noise. Draw it to the cabin. When you hear my signal, a single shot, you go completely silent. Hide. It will come after me." Before we could argue, the world exploded. An ear-splitting crack echoed from above. The entire cabin shuddered and dust rained down. A deep groaning sound came from the roof, the sound of immense weight settling on the log beams. It had found us. It was on the roof, and it was starting to tear our shelter apart. The methodical destruction of the house above was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It wasn't a frantic, animalistic rage. It was intelligent. A heavy, scraping sound, followed by a tremendous splintering crunch as a log was torn loose. Then silence. It was testing, probing, listening. It was too big, too used to open spaces to risk coming into a confined structure, but it was happy to tear it apart from the outside. "The plan's shot," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "There's no way you can get out." Silas's face was a mask of grim determination. The beast slammed its weight against the roof again, and one of the main support beams overhead cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. "Plans changed," Silas hissed. He grabbed Martin. "Martin, start screaming, yell at it, curse it, draw its attention to the front of the house." He turned to me. "Caleb, the cellar window. It's small, but it's enough. Give me a boost." Martin, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He took a deep breath and let out a raw, defiant roar. Hey, you ugly bastard, come and get me." The sounds of destruction above us immediately shifted, moving toward Martin's voice. I linked my hands, and Silas stepped into them. I heaved him up toward the small, ground-level window. He smashed the grimy pane with the butt of his shotgun and wriggled through. Just as he dropped to the ground outside, there was a deafening crash from directly above us. The trapdoor shattered, exploding inward. A single, colossal black claw, 5 feet of hooked keratin, punched through the opening, swiping blindly. It caught Martin, who was still yelling, across the leg. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. I dragged him away, back into the darkest corner, as the claw retracted. He was bleeding badly. I tore a strip from my shirt and fumbled to make a tourniquet, my hands slick with his blood. And then a harsh, crackling sound came from Silas's pack, which he'd dropped in the corner. His satellite phone was ringing. I scrambled over and answered it, pressing the bulky device to my ear. "Grandpa?" His voice came through, ragged and breathless, punctuated by the crashing sounds of pursuit. "Caleb, it's on me. It's working. Grandpa, get out of there, forget the plan." "No time," he gasped. I could hear his desperate, pounding footsteps. "Listen to me, son. I love you, always have. Be strong. For me." "Grandpa, no!" His breathing was a ragged torrent. I could hear the monster's roar, closer now. "I'm almost there. I see it. The smudge." There was a final, desperate burst of speed in his voice. "I'm going in." The line went dead. The phone's screen went black. But it wasn't silence. A psychic scream erupted in my mind, a soundless concussion that slammed into my skull. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a feeling, an idea, a torrent of alien thought that was foul and ancient. Images flooded my mind. A swirling vortex of black energy, vast crystalline structures branching through a void, and a voice. A chorus of grinding clicks, wet hisses and scraping chitin that echoed in the center of my being, somehow forming words. "Give glory to Ra'odith. His current shall guide." A final telepathic shriek, my grandfather's terror, pure and undiluted, was swallowed by the immense malevolent presence, and then nothing. Just the ringing in my ears and the cold, dead plastic of the sat phone in my hand. I came to as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the shattered cellar window. The world was silent. The forest was singing again. The beast was gone. Above us, where the cabin had stood, was a ruin. A husk. Martin was unconscious. I patched up his leg as best I could and half carried him out of the cellar. As we cleared the woods, I glanced back. The shimmering tear in the world was gone, leaving behind only an unnatural stillness in the air. The hunt was over. For now. I got Martin to my grandfather's old pickup truck and drove us back to my Jeep. In the first town we reached, I told them a cougar had attacked us. A big one. They bought it. Martin was taken away in an ambulance. A search party looked for Silas for a week. They found the ruined cabin. They found tracks they couldn't identify. But they never found him. He had simply vanished. It's been 5 years. Martin survived. He walks with a permanent limp and a haunted look in his eyes. The 4 deep, parallel scars on his thigh are a constant reminder. He never went back to the woods. I try to live a normal life, but the knowledge is a constant weight. The photo of the wendigo is still on my phone, but the body is now just a featureless black silhouette, the details smeared into nothing. When I checked the file's metadata, it was corrupted, claiming the picture was taken in the year 1900. And the real horror is what's happening to the records of Silas. The pictures of him are blurring. It's not just his face. It's his signature on old letters, his name in my high school yearbook, any record of his personal physical mark on the world. It's all smudging, fading, as if the universe is not just forgetting his face, but forgetting him. He wasn't just killed. He was erased. His final resting place isn't a quiet plot of earth in Montana. It's somewhere in that tangled, horrific network of glass-like pipes, adrift in a current that serves a being called Ra'odith. So I'll end this with a warning. If you're ever deep in the woods and you see a column of smoke where no fire should be, don't investigate. Don't be curious. Turn and run and don't look back, because you might just be the next piece of game in a hunt that spans worlds. A hunt with rules you will never ever understand.